Okay, I feel I should apologise talking about Auckland housing market now that I'm down in Wellington, but it seems to be that everybody talks about it. Even this morning at the airport, a former student of mine turned up and he said that he'd been living in Palmerston North and he'd been living in Wellington and he had to go back to Auckland, and he's just so amazed at how everybody's obsessed with the Auckland housing market. I'm going to focus on the affordability issue today and a bit of issues around sustainability and livability as it's being constructed by the council. And the talk that I'm going to give is based around a recent paper that's come out in Urban Studies in which I look at the politics of special housing areas. So I thought if you're not interested in housing, Auckland housing market, you might be interested in politics coming from Wellington. And in that study, what I did was I looked at the various evidence and that was driving policies around housing in New Zealand. You won't be able to read all of it, but I looked at central government reports, MB reports, regulatory impact statements, debates in Parliament. I looked at Auckland Council materials, multiple plans. I looked at the Productivity Commission, the Housing Special Areas Act and the bill, the debates around it. So over about 7,000 pages of text looking at how they constructed what was happening or how things would go in the future. So what I want to do is to talk a little bit about this emerging politics of affordability and how we resolve it, and putting special housing areas within that. I'm going to talk really quickly. I'm going through slides really quickly. I'll hopefully finish in time for questions. I'll throw out some things that may upset somebody or cause them to want to ask questions, and hopefully have plenty of time at the end to finish. So I would argue from about 2008, increasingly governments around the world began to worry about housing markets. From 2000 to 2008, housing markets were a great way of overcoming economic problems. Since 2008, now they realise that housing bubbles or booms could actually affect the economy. So increasingly housing affordability has come on the agenda of both central and local governments. We see that in the UK, we see it in Australia, we see it in New Zealand, we see it in the US. At the same time, when we think about policy responses to affordability, there's a literature out there about how do we create good policy, and the policy is being driven by what's called evidence-based policy practices, the idea that we can get the right evidence, we can have the right solutions, and we can borrow from other parts of the world. And in the paper, I spent a lot of time discussing some of the problems with that kind of argument. It seems to say we can take politics out of policy, but in fact, what we find out is that all evidence has to be screened by some political process. Either you accept some evidence and you reject other evidence. So I'll be looking a little bit at that. So what I'm arguing today is that increasingly planning for housing development involves political conflict. You've got local governments that are basing their plans on issues of things like sustainability and intensification, whereas central government are driving it on the issues of land supply and housing affordability. So I want to do very quickly, I'm going to look at some of the debate and the evidence kind of that's been driven for compact cities versus the supply argument. I want to quickly look at the Productivity Commission and how it linked to the Auckland Unitary Plan, and then spend some time on the housing accords. So if we look at urban planning processes over the last 25, 30 years, we see that internationally within the planning fraternity, there's been an emergence of a kind of an approach that's focused on sustainable development associated with urban intensification, compact cities, zero carbon development. And within that, I'm not going to talk about sustainability, within that there's a discussion about how can you be sustainable and affordable, and there's a debate about having mixed products, apartments as well as housing. You create a mixed product, you can have some affordable. Also, you can actually have a proactive planning system that requires the private sector to develop affordable housing. It's called inclusionary zoning or inclusionary housing, and this is where you have a regulation that requires you to include some affordable housing, and in most cases, such as in the UK, in England, it's retained affordable. It stays affordable. You're not just putting affordable into the market. So in a sense, if you look at these kind of policies and in that literature, there's a lot of evidence that this is happening around the world and has impact. So some of the evidence is that you can have compact policies and affordable. So if you look at the English context, Section 106 planning system where you require the private sector to provide affordable housing in order to build. Over 60, the red line, over 60% of affordable housing in England is being supplied by the private sector as part of the planning process. So you can produce affordable housing. It's evidence, it's an empirical evidence that you can do this. And just if you're interested in the drop in the affordable, the black bars dropped, it was to do with the way in which they funded other types of affordable housing. I'm happy to go back to that later. If we look at how can you provide affordable housing in a market through the planning system? Well, the planning system in the UK uses the standard development feasibility model, takes it from economic theory, looks at the finance of developers, and instead of attacking their margins, what you're attacking is the growth in land values. And so really what you're doing is a standard economic model in which you're comparing, can we provide affordable housing in a private market? And the evidence is, yes, you can do that. We've got lots of evidence. So this is one type of politics and evidence that is circulating within local governments around the world, that we can produce intensification, that we can provide affordable, and we can do certain policy responses. At the same time, a second kind of logic has emerged globally, and this is Ken Gibb argues mainstream economic analysis, and this argues that planning restrictions reduce housing supply and therefore increase housing affordability, particularly driven from the UK experience and the work of Kate Barker and a review of housing supply in the UK. There's specific issues around the UK that make it unusual, but that logic is now being exported to Australia and exported to New Zealand. We all kind of bought into this argument, and the argument's very simple. In the short run, top diagram, supply is fixed of housing. Any increase in demand will increase price. In the long run, there's a bit of more elastic supply. An increase in demand will increase supply and increase price. But if we can shift supply, if we can shift that supply line more and more, it should reduce prices. But if we restrict it in any way, like planning, then it's going to be a problem. Now, arguably, this debate has emerged. The simple argument is that planning is bad, supply is good, and that dichotomy is problematic. If we look at house prices, what drives house prices are a whole range of issues, including changing incomes, demographic processes, credit regimes, interest rates, price expectations, etc. And we know this in New Zealand, lots of evidence, lots of different things. Migration flows affects prices, expectations, credit. So there are a whole range of it. Supply is not the only answer. Second thing is that if we focus on supply, we ignore those complex issues. We ignore the demography, financial regimes, but we have a rather powerful political idea which could have negative legacies. If we've got a silver bullet, we'll increase the supply. So just in case you wonder, does supply reduce price? I just put this up here. This is housing production in Ireland going from about 20,000 units a year to over 90,000. The most houses produced per capita in Europe, and house prices increased by over 400%. Happy to talk about it later. Okay, but you can produce lots of houses and the prices go up. Now Adams says what's actually happening is that there's a lot of controversy, and the answer is not to be found in the empirical, not to be found in the numbers, but actually to do with values and interests, which is inherently political. And he argues that no government may ever be able to solve the problem, but what they do is serve the particular interest in the ascendancy. So I'm playing on that and looking at what's happened in New Zealand, looking at what happened around 2012, the Productivity Commission, the Housing Accord that emerged in Auckland, and then the Special Housing Act. So part of this was big politics like central government and the small politics, local government. Big politics, National Party elected in 2008, they repealed the Affordable Housing Enabling Territorial Authorities Act of 2008, which was our equivalent of inclusionary zoning, the same as the UK. And then they established the Productivity Commission. So the Productivity Commission, key independent report, identified an affordability problem, and in their summary, they particularly identified the costs associated with planning. So this is coming out 2012. And in the Auckland context, they laid a lot of the blame on the metropolitan urban limit. So they argued that the limit was a constraint on supply, increased prices. So at this time, the council was required to produce its plan for the next 30 years. And as a precursor to the plan, on Auckland Unleashed, they created this swift switch from creating a sustainable city to Auckland being the most livable city in the world. That's our goal. And we argue in a paper with Nick Lewis and myself, we argue that this notion of livability has kind of linked sustainability with innovation-led prosperity. So it's a competitive city and ecology all mixed together. So it's a very different form of sustainability. But the plan required changes, and in response to the government's pressure and to the Productivity Commission, they decided to move away from the metropolitan urban limit to a rural-urban boundary. And then they introduced at the bottom this notion of tools for affordability. So they, yes, will release land, but we'll still include this innovation requirement for the market to provide affordable housing. Next 2012, 2013, the government announced the Housing Accords, a fast tracking of housing production in Auckland to deal with housing crisis. If we look at the evolution of the report, what was significant is that the bill said that the government would create areas, they then engage with the councils in those areas, and then if they couldn't create it with the cooperation of the local authority, they would introduce the areas themselves. And so the housing consent could be either by the council or by MB. And so that's a significant change in the nature of the planning process, effectively, a very different type of planning process. And why are they doing this? Well, this is Bill English. He says explicitly planning laws are designed to drive up house price. And why are they designed it? Because you need that to get intensification. So this is a very explicit political statement that he's saying the whole system is wrong and we need to change it. And in this case, if it doesn't work, we're prepared to step in and put pressure. This is the pressure that was placed on the council. In that bill, the Auckland Council responded to it. They identified lots of problems, but they also said that really what was happening is that this kind of legislation does not respect the principles of local democracy, and nor did they even the principles of the Accord agreements. In the final reading of the bill, Nick Smith said that we've got a constipated planning system bogging new residential construction, and this bill is a laxative to get new houses flowing. Very rich imagery here. But really, what it is, it's talking about this political process where the evidence is that we believe housing supply is the answer and we're committed to that, and irrespective of anything else. And they either do it with cooperation or they will force. So that there's this accord idea, but also we're prepared to coerce you and force you to do it. If we look at the Act when it was introduced, the Act is to enhance housing affordability by facilitating the increase in land supply. So this is really buys into this. One argument is the supply is the answer. And then we identify the problem areas so that we need more supply by using some measures. And these are problematic. I've written about these before. I'm happy to talk about those. But the idea is we're going to produce more houses and that will bring down prices. Within the Act, there's no requirement to produce affordability, but it is allow for affordable housing. So you may include some criteria that have affordable dimensions to it. So in reflecting on the Act, I argue it privileges land supply as the key to housing affordable issues. It excludes any direct requirement, so it's not like the inclusionary zoning that you must provide, but you can provide. It debates on a kind of notion of a filtering trickle-down effect. If we build houses, even if they're really expensive houses, it'll leave gaps somewhere else in the market and they become cheaper. So whatever we build, if we build lots, it'll trickle down to the poor. Definitely challenges local government. So what's happened in Auckland is that the local council are very keen to ensure affordable housing, and it's done so by requiring that some portion of the housing, so 10% of the houses in special housing area must not exceed 75% of the Auckland region median price. Now that's clearly some kind of measure of affordability, but it's problematic because it's based only on price. So you could have building 5-bedroom houses and a couple of 1-bedroom apartments. If those 1-bedroom apartments are below the 75%, you've achieved your target. So there's some issues around that. And if we look at that 75%, what we find is in Auckland between 2012 up to 2000, so currently they're looking at 2015 prices, it's gone up 49%. So the 75% is now $5,780,000. So that's your affordable property. So it has implications for who can get into those places. So the SHAs have been released. This is the first tranche, looking at the kind of people developing it, looking at the types of products they're producing. And when we look at the prices they're talking about, you wonder if they really are affordable, like in the price range $550 to $750, etc. So are they affordable? And I just put this up. There's an assumption that if we build on the periphery, it's affordable. This is just an advertisement for a particular part of the city on the periphery. And if you look at the houses they're building, $1 million, $1 million, 900, million. So really these are quite a way out in the periphery, but they're expensive. The only ones that have affordable, there's an apartment, 1-bedroom apartment that's available for $600,000. So these are quite far out, but they're suburban, but the question is whether they're affordable. Okay, so again, even though the council have been trying to push affordability through the SHAs, they also want to make it a requirement that all developers provided retained affordable housing. That went through to the independent hearings and they rejected it. So they've rejected this notion of affordable, still relying on if we build lots of houses, they become affordable. So what have we built in the SHAs? As of May 26, this is the MB report on what's happening, 154 SHAs potentially producing 55,000 houses or dwellings. Of those, 17 of the sites are outside of the are in the future urban zone. 16 are outside the old metropolitan urban limit. So 29,000 dwellings in those SHAs outside of the old metropolitan urban limit are being developed. So you can see them on the north of the city here. So out beyond the blue line is the metropolitan urban limit. So they keep moving out, the city's moving out. And we can find it again in the southern quadrant. So keep pushing out around the periphery. And what has been built? About 1,000 dwellings. So still a lot to go. Only 1,000 dwellings in the last couple of years, but up to 50,000 plus. So if we look at them, what's happening? Clearly, the SHAs are producing houses. We know they will include affordable housing, or below the 75% threshold. But they're affordable at the time of sale. Doesn't mean they're going to stay at that price. They can go up. So will there be enough? The SHAs produce issues. They've still got lots of houses to be developed. So whether developers get problems and whether they slow production, that's an issue. If they have possible delays, it could trigger problems between central government and the politics of relationship between them. So in terms of conclusion, housing affordability, I would argue, is a complex or wicked problem. It's not. There's no silver bullet. It's complex. We have to address a whole range of things, including our mortgage markets, our desire to make money on our properties, our wealth effect of housing, a whole range of issues. The kind of emerging public-private consensus around new housing supply as a solution to housing affordability is actually a political construct. I was on the radio in Australia a year ago. I was giving a talk on why housing supply will not solve your housing problem. Talking to the person before they put you on the radio, and he said, "Oh, you're the one who doesn't believe housing supply will bring down prices." I said, "Yes." He said, "Did you not do Economics 101? And I said, yes, I did. And then he said, you're on live. And he put me on. It seems very odd, but I'm happy to talk why housing supply doesn't bring down house prices. The Accords combine political cooperation and coercion. They still don't know how that's going to operate going forward. The new housing supply consensus diverts our attention from other things: mortgage markets, wealth inequality, presumption of capital gain. The drive for new housing supply has implications for sustainability and livability going forward. So I'll leave it at that, and I've got plenty of time for questions.